Hello everyone. Today I'm at Thornton Place in the centre of Sunderland, once part of the centre of Bishopwearmouth. That particular object is the only thing that gives any clue that there was a cemetery, or the Gill Cemetery, close by. That was one of the gateposts for one of the entrances to the cemetery. Just that gives some idea of how far the cemetery stretched. Apologies for the noise because right next to a busy road. Crossover and I'll show you the site of the Gill Cemetery. This video is just a short history of the Gill Cemetery. It's been known by a number of names: Rector's Gill Cemetery, Galleys Gill Cemetery, Gilbridge Cemetery, but the main one is the Gill Cemetery. That's the name people used at the time, and when they remembered loved ones who were buried there in other cemeteries, they always put Gill Cemetery on the headstone to remember it. So it's going to be known as the Riverside Park and the Southern Gateway and Kingsley Gardens.
What's that camera?
Sorry?
What's the camera?
Canon V10. They're about, it's one of the cheapest ones, but it's alright, it's about 300 quid. If the camera for pictures is really good if it's blue sky.
Megapixels or what?
I'll just use it for videos mainly, but if it's a blue... yeah, it's like the cheapest budget.
Canon, which one?
V10. I got it from Curry's over there for about 300 quid last year and off there. It's good if you're out and about, want to do videos, it's really good. And blue sky camera's alright. If it's a cloudy day, it's just like your mobile phone.
Oh, is it? Oh,
Yeah, if you want to see the quality, go on YouTube, Life and Death in a Northern Town. You'll be able to see what they look like. Cheers, sir. Thanks, sir. Yeah, I'm not really good with technology in terms of cameras, so... Right, where was it? So if you look across over there is Sunderland Minster. At the time, it was Bishopwearmouth Parish Church, or St Michael and the Angel. Now, back in the 1830s, the rector was Reverend Gerald Valerian Wellesley, who was the brother of the Duke of Wellington. Now, the churchyard was getting full of burials. It's not a huge churchyard like Sunderland Parish Church, so it was decided that land the church owned would be given as a new cemetery. And that was this particular area here in Galleys Gill, which was a historic routeway down to the River Wear. We'll move around here to be a bit quieter and you'll get a much better view of the site. There's a hell of a lot of work being going on around here with this riverside development. That's something that's completed. That is the stunning brand new car park. Has a lot of critics. People get really angry about it, but it does look, it's got to admit, it does look impressive, doesn't it? You get some great views from the top up there. It's rather warm. So in 1839 this particular cemetery was opened, and it stretched from where I showed you that pillow down at Thornton Place right along that white fence, pretty much down to the back in the distance over there, and it came down to the edge of this road. This is the old road that used to be a lane down to the river. You used to get coal trimmers going down there. There's the lantern drops and the Hetton Staithes down there where trains used to bring coal to be taken around off around the country or around the world. So the parish church at that time had the churchyard. There was also a smaller extension cemetery over at High Street, which only ever had about 300 or 400 burials over the few decades it was open. So at one time there was three particular churchyards for the parish church. The one problem was, when somebody was buried, they didn't specify in the burial records where that particular person was buried. So sometimes if it was somebody famous who died, then it might mention in the paper that they were buried at, say, the Gill cemetery. Also, if there were certain incidents like the Bishopwearmouth ironworks explosion, it mentioned there who was buried here. So from 1839 to 1848, burials were mainly here and at the churchyard. Well, as I said, unfortunately couldn't specify who was buried where. But in 1848, the churchyard was closed unless you had space in a grave for like a family member and so on. So pretty much from 1848 through to the middle of 1856, this was the main burial ground for Bishopwearmouth. There were other burial grounds in Bishopwearmouth, which is the Quaker one, the Jewish one. There was a couple of places where you could have vault burials, but generally this is a place most people from Bishopwearmouth would be buried. It's hard to give an estimate of how many people are actually buried here, but as an example, between 1848 and the middle of 1856, because in May 1856 Bishopwearmouth Cemetery opened and replaced this, but just like as at the churchyard, there was the possibility to bury family members here, like a spouse, if you had a vault. There was 24 vaults over where that crane is, which were gated and so family members could be placed in there, like if you see in the old vaults down Highgate Cemetery, that type of thing. So pretty much, say 500 people a year from 1848 to 1856. There's over 3,500. Then you've got the people after that, the handful of people in the vaults, but then you've also got however many people were buried between 1839 and 1848. So you can probably safely say it's at least 5,000. I have collected names from people who are mentioned in other cemeteries that are buried around the city in a few decades after that. And as I said, 99.9% all mention the Gill Cemetery. I think one mentions Rector's Gill Cemetery. The victims of the 1849 cholera epidemic from Bishopwearmouth, I think it was about 60 odd, were buried here. A couple of them did actually headstones that were listed here. But when this particular graveyard effectively closed in 1856, within a couple of months, some of the church wardens let the builder dump loads of earth over a large area of this particular cemetery and took down some headstones and put them to the side of the wall. There was a bit of an uproar about this desecration, so they were ordered to put the headstones back. But that's sort of like just the beginning of how this fell into disrepair, because as I said, the only where you would know there was a cemetery here was that gatepost, and even then it doesn't tell you anything about this particular site. But that bit where the road is in the distance, that I believe was more like an ornamental part of the cemetery, where it was like grass rather than actual burials. That area's gone now because obviously Silksworth Row has been extended over the years, widened several times. Just as I'm here, we're actually working on the Eye Infirmary over there on a Sunday. Must be getting paid a good rate. But over the next few decades, this place fell into disrepair. There was vandalism. Rubbish was dumped here. It was just nobody wanted to pay for the upkeep of it. Even went to the Home Secretary, went to court, because the burial board for the new cemetery didn't want to have anything to do with it, and the church didn't want anything to have to do with it, so it was literally a dump. There was also a cemetery chapel which is pretty much opposite where I am now, close to where that excavate digger is over there, and that was for, you could have funeral services in there before the bodies were interred. After the cemetery closed, that became a dead house, which was a mortuary for people whose bodies were unidentified or victims of crimes, things like that were placed in there, but that was demolished I think around 1920 and so on. Famous people buried here, well, William Blackett, who created the department stores, my favourite artist of all time, John Wilson Eubank, He had an amazing story, a sad ending for him, his family and everybody else. Thomas Pigg, a local mathematician. There was also Dr. William Reid Clanny, the Northern Irish doctor who was involved in the development of Mayans lamps and became well known during the 1831 cholera epidemic. Plus some other members of the great and good of the local community, plus paupers. Also people who died on the river while travelling up, while on work from other parts of the country. Bottle makers from down in Deptford. Thousands of people. So in about 1913-14, a decision was made to take down about 75% of the graveyard and turn it into an open space. So a quarter was left, and that was over towards that crane. The rest of it was like just headstones were taken down. It was created with an open space. There'd been plans over the years that it was used as a rubbish dump. It was actually filled in, so the actual cemetery level is much lower than you can see today. That's why no bodies have been discovered while they'd turning this into like a park and gardens. Then I think it was 1932, 1933, the last quarter of the cemetery was taken down and the headstones placed against the wall. So at one point you had headstones on that far side and then also on the wall running down here. They were recorded. There was at least 300 headstones. The vaults themselves, they suffered from desecration. There's people who broke into them to get the lead out. Kids messed around with the skulls and the bones and opened the coffins. So eventually they were sealed up. They're actually still there, but they're way below the surface. There was also air raid shelters built at the front end just before the Second World War. Around 1950 it was excavated again. It actually looks like nothing like it did back in the day. If you see the old pictures, this was like a valley going down the river. Gives a little hint of it down there. That's down towards Gill Bridge, and in the distance you can see the Stadium of Light. We're actually really close to the centre of the modern day city of Sunderland. So kids from the local schools would often play football on here, football games on, activities. Kids would play here and play amongst the stones. And then there used to be a play park over there. You can still see the basketball hoop still standing somehow. And it was only about 5 years ago I sort of got really interested in the history of this place, and I started doing a little bit walking around just before they started all this particular work. The headstones were in shrubbery over there. Now, sadly, there's a fitting end to this particular cemetery. In April last year, the construction company buried the headstones. They told me they were over close to the site where they stood. I've been invited to a meeting with them and they told me the plans for it, but when they said they were going to be buried, I misunderstood that, thinking it meant they were just temporarily buried in sand until all the work was done. Then they would be resited somewhere on here, which I think would have been an absolutely fitting memorial. I am hoping that one day there will be some sort of memorial here, like a blue plaque, just to let people know the history of this particular site. I have created a group on Facebook called the Gill Cemetery, which got lots of stories about the people who are buried here. There was one guy who was at the Battle of Trafalgar. He got captured later that year and spent about 11 years as a prisoner, a guest of Napoleon. So me and other people have done a few stories about those who are interred here, some of the events that are linked to it. It's also got lots of pictures from over the years of what it looked like, even back to like the late Victorian times. There's a couple of pictures so you can get an idea of the history of this particular place, but really is a shame how it's ended up like this. But as I said, I think the last burial in the vault was something around 1880s for a local guy. He's buried with his family in one of the vaults. God knows why, because it was an absolute dump, whereas Bishopwearmouth Cemetery was absolutely beautiful. right on the edge of the town. Very scenic, idyllic. But this was just an absolute dump. So its decline just went through the years. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. I've probably forgotten loads of things, but it's Sunday morning. I've just been for my breakfast at Wetherspoon, so to upload that video about Lamesley I did yesterday because I haven't got any Wi-Fi still at home and so on. So there it is, a short history of the Gill Cemetery. So thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy that, please give it a like, and if you want to, click on subscribe. And I will see you next time. Take care.